Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of For What It's Nerd. Today, we are doing something slightly different, that being our first ever mailbag on the podcast. What I essentially mean by a mailbag is it's like a Q&A, right? You're sending in questions, people who watch are sending in questions, and we're responding. It's also kind of like how in comics, at the back of comics, you used to have like an editor's letters to the editor type section. Very much like that. We kind of want to hear from people about the podcast, about Marvel, about Star Wars. So if you have any questions for the future, feel free to drop into our Discord. We do have a mailbag channel there, which you can put into any questions you want in there. What I'll do is pretty much jump straight into the questions. I have a few curated from a list of what people had already given me, and I think they're pretty interesting. I think we've got a lot to talk about here. So, first one, very poignant to the podcast itself. Drill Magus asks, what made you decide to do a podcast? What made me kind of decide to do a podcast was a number of different things. Primarily, someone suggested I do it, and I think it helps when someone suggests that you do something because you almost feel like, well, at least one person would want to watch me do it, right? It turns out that more wanting to watch me do it, but at the first kind of hurdle, you don't know if anyone cares, and so when someone says you should do that, it's kind of very, very nice to hear. But I think it's also because I have a lot to say. Sometimes not for the best, but I have a lot to say usually. And so I feel like this is a perfect way of getting my points out in a way that really I can articulate, but I don't have to kind of conform to a short medium like TikTok or 240 characters on Twitter, etc. I can articulate as much as I want about any subject I want. But I mean, now that I'm in it, I think that decision to continue making the podcast has changed slightly. I think, we sit at a point where a lot of people don't like a lot of things, especially Marvel and Star Wars. They hate the content. Like, fans of Star Wars and Marvel hate the content that comes out around Star Wars and Marvel. And I feel like there needs to be people who kind of, this sounds kind of very weird to say, but fight the good fight, so to speak, and kind of not necessarily fighting for Marvel, because sometimes I think Marvel does the wrong thing, and same with Star Wars. I don't necessarily agree with every decision, but I think it's about fighting for, let's discuss things, let's talk about things. There's a lot of content creators out there who are so willing just to throw shit constantly and complain and argue and all that type of stuff. But there are ones that are doing the opposite too, kind of discussing and having those conversations. And I think I'd rather be on that side of the line and kind of stand up for it in a sense, because I feel like a lot of the stuff that surrounds these issues is racially motivated and sexist, has sexist tendencies around it. And I feel like if you don't say something about that, not that you're complicit, because I don't think everyone has a platform to be able to do that, but I think, if you have a platform and then you don't say something about these things, then to an extent, are you kind of culpable? I mean, not necessarily fully. I mean, some people just want to stay away from that and enjoy the content, and that's absolutely fine. I understand that. But some things are bigger than just enjoying the content. And I feel that very wholeheartedly. So I feel like sometimes you have to come and kind of dispute things. And I think whilst, yes, Marvel and Star Wars in a microcosm are incredibly small, they are, in kind of like society as a whole, Marvel and Star Wars isn't the biggest thing, but it's what I know, right? And so if I can discuss that and kind of change opinions on things, that means the world to me. That's more important than the actual podcast itself, if that makes sense. The success of the podcast is less important to me than being able to change or somehow enlighten someone's opinion on something that isn't the right opinion. I'm not saying that on every single thing, by the way. I'm not saying that you have to like The Last Jedi all of a sudden. I use that one a lot. I use that example a lot. But you know what I mean? I'm not saying you have to, you have to like The Last Jedi suddenly. I'm just saying, let's not hate it for X, Y, and Z, So that's why I kind of decided to make a podcast. The next question is from Andy25 Brown. Would you add a co-host producer to the show? As a kind of general rule, I wouldn't be against it. I think my issue is that there will be a lot of criteria to hit to where I would kind of say that's the person I want to have on, because I have a lot of people who are really good friends. I have a lot of people who I mesh with, but I don't know if I have someone who I feel would be happy sitting next to me every single week doing a podcast, because we obviously do it weekly. It's not monthly or fortnightly. So we have this kind of situation where I would need them available pretty much Friday, Saturday, or Sunday to record every single week. In the UK time zone, GMT/BST, depending on the time of year. So I think it'd be really hard. Now, what I've done to kind of alleviate this slightly, now, for those who aren't aware, I run my own channel, my personal channel, Peralta's Place, on YouTube, Twitch, etc. Apart from it, it's not a podcast. So apart from that, I have it on every other platform. And what I've done more recently there is I've started to take on, should I say, an editor, which frees up more time to be able to do more things like do the podcast. So if that is something beneficial, then maybe there's a point where I could almost start looking at bringing someone into the podcast in terms of like having a co-host, etc., because I would have more time to be record because I'm not editing as much on my other channel. But as of right now, it would have to be kind of someone who's available Friday, Saturday, Sunday, at pretty much any time during those days. Not exactly, because obviously we would discuss it beforehand, but it would be a hard thing to sell to someone. I need you at these days for this reason for now, when versus me just kind of, right, I'll do it. Like, I am recording this pretty much the same morning that it's going to go out on tonight, whereas like I couldn't do that obviously if I had a co-host. I'd have to like kind of work around someone else's schedule as well, which isn't necessarily bad, and it can add a lot to have a co-host, and you can do episodes then where you don't need a guest. But I think, as long as you're smart about your content, as long as you're doing stuff like mailbags, etc., then it's not so bad. You can do different things with it. Like, I'm sat here now doing a mailbag because I didn't really have anyone to come on this week, and again, it was just timing, scheduling wise, right? So I kind of went, okay, let's do I'll sit down and discuss kind of this way. And so if you're intelligent about your content, you don't necessarily need a co-host, I don't think. Next up, we have It's Not Anna, and she asks, which character from the comics do you want to appear in the MCU most? Why? This is a really good question, and what I would say to it is, most of the characters I already want are either going to be appearing in the MCU very soon or have already appeared. Like the Fantastic Four are coming. We are likely to see Doctor Doom at some point. You've got a number of other characters coming into play very soon. Wonder Man is another one, a very obscure character, but I do like him. So I kind of don't really have too many. But if I was to say something, it's not necessarily that I want this character like a lot, but I would say Cyclops. Now, that sounds very weird because you guys will probably think, well, Cyclops is pretty boring. If you've ever watched an X-Men movie, or maybe if you've read some X-Men comics, you'd probably think Cyclops is boring. He's not the best X-Man, X-person. Wolverine's better. And to that, I'd say, fuck you. No, I'm kidding. But the issue with Cyclops is that he's sidelined a lot. He's an exceptional leader. He has a lot of good moments in the comics, very interesting moments, and he has a lot of interest to his character. But whenever he's shown up in a franchise, in like the movies, in like pretty much anything, he is sidelined by Wolverine. So I'm really hoping that when the MCU do the X-Men, that they give Cyclops a bit more like to do. Not necessarily that he didn't have character. I think he did have character in the other movies, but I think a bit more to do, right? Because I feel like Wolverine always overshadows this kind of movie, the X-Men movies. And then obviously because Wolverine overshadows, then you've got Phoenix, Jean Grey, who overshadows. So you get like characters like Cyclops and Storm as well. Storm is another example. These characters who are very prevalent in X-Men comics and X-Men media that are known by everyone, but have very little to do, and I think that needs to change. I think Cyclops and Storm are the characters I want to see really kind of pushed a lot more when X-Men finally come to the MCU. Keeping with the Marvel theme for a minute, a lot of people asked, and I found this very interesting, a lot of people were asking what my favorite Marvel movie is and what my least favorite was. Now, this is a hard one because I changed my opinion on this a lot, because I think a lot of people do, right? You can't really keep the same opinion forever, because as soon as another movie's released, you kind of, the hierarchy of liking / disliking might change. We are currently rewatching the MCU, a lot of us as kind of part of the community, and what I've realized is I very much still hate Iron Man 2. I think Iron Man 2 is pretty shit. I'm sorry to anyone who likes Iron Man 2, but I really, really hate Iron Man 2. The Incredible Hulk is not great, but it has some interesting parts. Thor 1 is pretty bad. Basically, the start of the MCU is not as good as people make it out to be. I'm sorry, it's true. I think the only one that did half decently for me on the first run was Captain America. But yeah, I think the MCU started pretty poorly. I think apart from Iron Man 1 and kind of like Thor 2, and again, I know a lot of people don't like Thor 2, so again, by some people's standards, there's not much going on in Phase 1, but I really don't like Phase 1 all that much. I watch it very quickly. Favorites, that's harder still, because I can definitely tell you which something I dislike, but I can't really tell you what I really, really like. I think it changes, again, pretty much with the movie that comes out. Not so much this time with Love and Thunder, because I found Love and Thunder had a number of issues. I think it might change to be Black Panther 2 Wakanda Forever when that comes out, because that looks like a very poignant movie. But right now, if I was to say on the spot, I would say... oh no, this is hard. It's a lot harder than I thought. I'd probably say Infinity War. Now, because I'm not a big fan of Endgame, because I think Endgame kind of fumbles the bag on Infinity War, but I think Infinity War is a very good movie. It has a lot of strong scenes in it. It has a lot of strong character building. Not that Endgame doesn't, by the way. I'm not saying that it doesn't. I just think Endgame fumbles the bag slightly in some areas, with Hulk and with Thor. I don't like how Thor is treated in those movies. In fact, I don't like how Thor is treated in most of the MCU, but that's a totally different story. So I'd say Infinity War, just kind of like a gut reaction right now, but it could change on a dime, because I go back and forth. Like Multiverse of Madness is also a really good one for me. I love Multiverse of Madness, but I don't know if it'll be a top spot, like probably 2 or 3. It changes. So another question I got asked was from an anonymous individual, and they had said, what is your favorite scene in Star Wars and why? And my answer to this took a long while to actually figure out, because there's so much good Star Wars and there's so much to love within it, right? But what I came to is a scene in Rogue One. And now this is a spoiler if you haven't seen Rogue One, but if you haven't, why haven't you at this point? It's like freaking 5 years old or something. I forget how long now. I love the Princess Leia scene in Rogue One. Now, I know a lot of people will say that's very controversial, because people always complain about the CGI of that scene. They say it looks a bit janky, etc., etc. But the way that one line of hope is delivered is just so exceptionally poignant, and it tops off Rogue One as a movie. You get to that point and you understand what it's all worth, what the whole movie has been about. Saving lives, saving hope, essentially. And so I really love Rogue One, and that scene for that reason, because you've got this kind of very poignant moment in the film where you feel like almost anything is possible. It's very much harkening to a line that is earlier in the movie. Again, I'm kind of going into Rogue One analysis here, but deal with it. Where Cassian Andor says, make 10 men feel like 100 or 1,000. I forget the exact line right now. I'm sorry. I imagine me saying it feels so poignant and then not only the line, but either way, the idea that you can make someone feel so much stronger than they actually physically tangibly are is such a strong thing, and that's what that scene is. It lightens you see it, and like you get goosebumps and you get like, I could do anything right now. And I love that scene, because I think so many scenes in movies are very dour, and a lot of people talk about their favorite scenes being a time someone's head gets chopped off or someone gets absolutely mutilated. And I think it's just nice to have a wholesome scene that you like the most. I think it's really nice to have this moment of like your heart swelling as you watch something in a cinema or on your screens at home. Another anonymous question was, Do you prefer Marvel or Star Wars? Any particular reason for liking one over the other? So this is a funny point because we actually just got something about this the other day. Mark Ruffalo, who plays the Hulk in the MCU, made a statement saying that essentially Star Wars is bland, so to speak, that you get the same thing on repetition, whereas the MCU is the opposite of that. It has a lot of different like differentiation within it. And I'll be honest, it struck me as weird because firstly, the MCU is relatively formulaic. Like, I can say that as someone who loves the MCU, that despite something like WandaVision or She-Hulk that's coming out this week, despite all that, I think more than not, you're dealing with a cookie cutter situation. Like, generally the movies follow like the if something goes wrong, Infinity Stone, blah, like there's a lot of things that are kind of similar across the movies. And I don't hate that. A lot of movies are built on the same premise. I mean, every Tomb Raider or Indiana Jones movie or Power Rangers movie, or they're all the same in premise because they have a similar ethic about them, so to speak. And the same is true of Star Wars to an extent, especially the saga films. But like Star Wars TV and Rogue One and Solo, which again, Rogue One is coming up. Sorry about that, guys. Do have a very different feel, and Andor apparently is going to be very different to anything Star Wars has put out to date. So I do kind of balk at the idea that Star Wars is one note. So that's kind of the first thing I'll say. That I don't think Star Wars is as one note as people think, and I do think Marvel is slightly more one note than people think as well. With that said, I have a longer relationship with Star Wars than I do with Marvel. I find myself on a daily basis reading more Star Wars, engaging with more Star Wars than I do Marvel, because Marvel comics are very hard to get into, for one, which when you're someone who didn't necessarily come in through the comics fully to begin with, then kind of left the comics, then came back to the comics, it's very different to someone who has read Star Wars books for most of their lives. Like, as soon as you have that kind of connection, you're always going to like something a little bit more, right? Because, something that's been brought through from your childhood into your adult life is instantly more attached to you than something that you picked up kind of in your adolescence, so to speak, which I know sounds very weird to say as someone who is relatively young still, but you know what I mean. Like, I feel like Star Wars has been with me for longer, so in that sense, Star Wars. But I have a lot of conversations with people about Marvel a lot of the time, because I think I have a lot more friends who like Marvel than I do friends who like Star Wars. And I think Marvel is slightly more mainstream than Star Wars as well. So it depends on why you're talking about Marvel versus Star Wars, if that makes sense. Star Wars, I love for the world, the universe they built, because it's pretty much unique. It doesn't really exist anywhere else. Marvel, I love for the heroes and the characters they make, because even despite them being sort of similar to DC characters, etc., there's a lot of characters from Marvel that are very unique, right? And I like that. I also like the superhero genre just because, again, it's similar to the Leia question that I just answered. You get this feeling of like, you can do anything type thing. But I think, yeah, again, Star Wars does that too. So it's weird. I think it depends on the day. It depends when you catch me. I say that about a lot, but I feel like if you ever give a definitive answer to a lot of these questions, you're going to get strung up by them eventually when someone says, well, why don't you like that anymore? I mean, tastes change, but people don't. So to speak, they always think, well, why are you changing? Why are you changing your stance on this now? I feel like if you very much definitively say that is my favorite movie and always will be, then you box yourself into other viewpoints, other changes. For example, Shadow of the Sith was a book I read recently, which is a Star Wars book that kind of is a prequel to not just Force Awakens, but pretty much the whole sequel saga, the sequel trilogy, and it really makes the trilogy better. And I know a book shouldn't be the thing to do that. The movies themselves should be good. But Shadow of the Sith completely changes my opinion on a lot of things in 7, 8, 9. And I wish they had almost made Shadow of the Sith into like a prologue story, like make, if they'd almost had made 7 a prologue, then do 8, 9, and like 9.5 or 10, which I know would obviously be very different to the usual trilogy format, but I don't think a quadrilogy would have been bad to finish off the saga with, you know. End on 10, that kind of sounds even better, right? But anyway, I mean, the thing is, at the end of the day, Marvel and Star Wars are both good, and I'm not going to sit here and say one is better than the other, because at the end of the day, Marvel does some great things, Star Wars does some great things. I mean, if you look at the past few months, we got Love and Thunder, which I don't think was the best movie ever, but we got Kenobi this year, which I thought was great. We're getting Andor, which I thought was great, but you know, we got Boba Fett last year, which wasn't necessarily the best. Or was that this year? I forget. Timelines are weird, but Boba Fett wasn't the best. So I mean, you know, there kind of in a nutshell, I mean, obviously that's very like, that's not like quantifiable data, so to speak, but right away there you have, you know, kind of 3 or 4 projects that are from the two bigs, Marvel and Star Wars, and some of them are shit and some of them are good. And the same can be said of the movies, and the same can be said of everything. Marvel has great things, Star Wars has great things. Enjoy them both. That's the top and bottom of it. That is pretty much all of our questions today, guys. Apart from, I did get a question as well from Jewel Megas. I did think it was kind of funny, so we'll end on this because I am recording this just before lunchtime. What's for dinner? I think I'll be having some pasta. Probably. I've been eating a lot of pasta recently. I don't know why necessarily. I think it's just because it's easy. But that's a story for another time. Very on the go, very busy. A lot to do. If you guys want to see more on here, let me know. We will try and do more mailbags. We'll try and do more podcasts. We'll try and even maybe do some other segments if possible. I know a few people were talking about tier lists. They would like to see some tier lists, kind of just as a bit of a fun thing to do. That would be kind of something I'd be very interested in. So we'll see about doing that in the near future. Other than that, guys, thank you so much for coming and hanging out. If you want to check out our socials, they will be in the description. I think with podcasts, it's weird. I find it hard to put it in the description because I don't know how that exactly works. But on YouTube, if you want to find our socials, they will be in the description. And thank you guys, as always, for coming. I will see you next week, possibly to discuss She-Hulk, possibly to discuss something else. Who knows? Thanks, guys. And I'll see you later.